The blade whistled through the air, missing Olivia Foster by mere inches as she stumbled backward against the stone wall of the Great Hall. Her heart hammered against her ribs as Jerry Diaz stepped between her and the advancing attacker, his sword gleaming in the firelight. The man who had sworn to protect her, whom everyone whispered about with fear and suspicion, now stood as her only shield against certain death. "Stay behind me," Jerry commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. The wedding feast had transformed into a battlefield in moments, guests scattering as armed men poured through the doors. Olivia pressed herself against the cold stone, watching Jerry's broad shoulders move with practiced precision as he parried another strike. This was the moment that would define everything. The culmination of a journey that had begun with her desperate flight from one nightmare into what she had believed would be another. 3 months earlier, Olivia had stood at the gates of Jerry Diaz's fortress with nothing but the clothes on her back and a letter of arrangement clutched in her trembling hands. The autumn wind cut through her threadbare cloak as she gazed up at the imposing walls of Ravenshollow Keep. Behind her lay the smoldering ruins of her family's estate, claimed by creditors and enemies alike after her father's death in battle. Before her stretched an uncertain future as the wife of a man she had never met, a knight whose reputation preceded him like a shadow. The villagers had whispered terrible things about Jerry Diaz during her journey north. They called him the Iron Wolf, spoke of his scarred face and his cold demeanor. Some claimed he had killed his first wife in a fit of rage, though others insisted she had simply wasted away from loneliness in his remote castle. The stories varied, but the fear in people's voices remained constant. No woman wanted to be bound to such a man, they said. Better to remain a spinster than to marry a beast. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. Olivia had no choice in the matter. Her father's debts and the political machinations of Lord Dennis Hill had sealed her fate. She would marry Jerry Diaz and bring what remained of her family's lands into his domain, or she would face destitution and shame. The arrangement benefited everyone except her, or so it seemed as she approached the massive oak doors of the keep. The man who greeted her bore little resemblance to the monster of village tales. Jerry Diaz stood tall and broad-shouldered, his dark hair streaked with premature gray at the temples. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, but it did not make him hideous as she had expected. Instead, it spoke of battles survived and hardships endured. His eyes, a deep brown that reminded her of rich earth after rain, regarded her with careful assessment rather than cruelty. "Lady Olivia Foster," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to emanate from deep within his chest. "Welcome to Ravenshollow." She curtsied awkwardly, her legs still unsteady from days of travel. "My lord, I thank you for your hospitality." Jerry's gaze lingered on her pale face and the dark circles beneath her eyes. She looked like a sparrow that had flown too far from its nest, fragile and exhausted. "You must be weary from your journey. Ruth Patel will show you to your chambers." An older woman with kind eyes and graying hair stepped forward from the shadows of the hall. Ruth Patel had served as the keep's head of household for nearly 2 decades, and she recognized the signs of a young woman pushed to her limits. "Come, child," she said gently, placing a protective arm around Olivia's shoulders. "Let's get you settled and fed." As Ruth guided her through the corridors of the keep, Olivia caught glimpses of Jerry's domain. The castle was well-maintained but austere, its stone walls adorned with simple tapestries rather than lavish decorations. Servants moved about their duties with quiet efficiency, and she noticed how they nodded respectfully to Ruth rather than cowering in fear. Whatever darkness lurked in these halls, it did not seem to touch the daily lives of those who called Ravenshollow home. Her chambers occupied the eastern tower, with windows that overlooked the keep's gardens and the rolling hills beyond. The room was spacious and comfortable, furnished with a large bed draped in deep blue hangings, a writing desk near the window, and a fireplace that Ruth quickly set ablaze. "Lord Jerry thought you might prefer privacy while you adjust to your new home," Ruth explained as she bustled about, directing servants who brought hot water and fresh linens. "The wedding is planned for a month hence, giving you time to recover from your travels and become acquainted with the household." Olivia sank into a chair beside the fire, grateful for its warmth. What manner of man is he truly? The stories I heard during my journey painted him as something less than human. Ruth paused in her arrangements, her expression growing thoughtful. Lord Jerry has known great sorrow in his life, but he is not the monster people claim him to be. He is fair to his people and honorable in his dealings, though he keeps his own counsel and trusts slowly. Perhaps that is wisdom rather than weakness. Over the following days, Olivia began to observe Jerry from a distance. She watched from her tower window as he trained with his men-at-arms in the courtyard below. Noting how he corrected their stances with patience rather than harsh words, she saw him settle disputes between villagers with careful consideration, listening to all sides before rendering judgment. When a merchant tried to cheat one of the castle's servants, Jerry intervened not with violence, but with a quiet word that sent the man scurrying away with his tail between his legs. The Iron Wolf of reputation seemed to exist only in the imaginations of those who had never met him. The real Jerry Diaz was something far more complex and, in its way, more unsettling. He was a man who carried himself with the weight of command, but showed unexpected gentleness to those under his protection. Olivia found herself studying his face during the evening meals they shared in the Great Hall, searching for signs of the cruelty she had been taught to expect. Their conversations during these dinners remained formal and cautious. Jerry inquired about her health and comfort, but did not press for personal details about her past. Olivia answered his questions politely while volunteering little about herself. They circled each other like wary animals, each uncertain of the other's true nature. The breakthrough came during her second week at Ravens Hollow. Olivia had risen early to walk in the gardens, seeking solace among the late-blooming roses and herb beds that Ruth tended with such care. The morning mist clung to the ground, and she thought herself alone until she heard the soft sound of voices from beyond a hedge of yew trees. Jerry knelt beside a small grave marked with a simple stone cross, speaking in low tones to someone Olivia could not see. Curiosity overcame propriety, and she crept closer until she could make out his words. "I know you would have liked her, Elena," he was saying, his voice thick with emotion she had never heard before. "She has your gentle spirit, though she tries to hide it behind walls of fear. I pray I can prove worthy of the trust her father placed in me, even in death." Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she realized Jerry was speaking to the grave of his first wife. The tenderness in his voice, the raw grief that colored every word, revealed a depth of feeling that contradicted everything she had been told about him. This was not the cold-hearted killer of village gossip, but a man still mourning the loss of someone he had loved deeply. She began to retreat, not wanting to intrude on such a private moment, but a twig snapped beneath her foot. Jerry's head turned sharply, and their eyes met across the small garden space. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then Jerry rose slowly, his expression guarded once more. "Lady Olivia, I did not expect to find you abroad so early." Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized how her eavesdropping must appear. "Forgive me, my lord, I could not sleep and thought a walk might help. I did not mean to disturb your prayers." Jerry studied her face, perhaps seeing something there that convinced him of her sincerity. "Elena was my first wife," he said simply. "She died of fever 3 years past. I come here sometimes to speak with her, though I know it may seem foolish to others." "It does not seem foolish to me," Olivia replied softly. "Love does not die simply because the beloved is no longer with us. My mother used to say that the dead live on in the hearts of those who remember them with kindness." Something shifted in Jerry's expression, a subtle relaxation of the rigid control he maintained. "Your mother sounds like a wise woman. I regret that I never had the opportunity to meet her." "She died when I was 15, Olivia said, surprising herself with the admission. "Sometimes I still find myself turning to ask her advice, only to remember that she is not there to give it." They stood in silence for a moment, two people who had known loss recognizing that shared experience in each other. When Jerry spoke again, his voice held a warmth that had been absent from their previous interactions. "Would you care to walk with me? The gardens are particularly beautiful at this hour, and Ruth has worked hard to maintain them despite the challenges of our northern climate." Olivia nodded, and they began to stroll along the graveled paths that wound between beds of herbs and late-season flowers. Jerry proved to be a knowledgeable guide, pointing out plants that had medicinal properties and sharing stories of how Ruth had coaxed reluctant blooms from the harsh mountain soil. His passion for his land and his people became evident as he spoke, and Olivia found herself relaxing in his presence for the first time since her arrival. "You care deeply for Ravens Hollow," she observed as they paused beside a fountain where water trickled musically over carved stone. "It is my responsibility," Jerry replied, then seemed to consider his words more carefully. "No, that understates it. This place and its people have become part of me. When I inherited the keep from my uncle, it was little more than a ruin. The villages were plagued by bandits, the fields lay fallow, and hope was scarce. Building something better from that foundation has been the work of my life. And now you must share that work with a stranger," Olivia said, voicing the thought that had troubled her since her arrival. "A woman thrust upon you by political necessity rather than chosen by your heart." Jerry stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Lady Olivia, I will not pretend that our marriage is born of romance. But neither is it the burden you seem to believe it to be. You bring with you not only lands that will strengthen our borders, but also, I hope, companionship and partnership in the years to come. I do not expect you to love me, but I hope we might build something of value together." His honesty was both refreshing and unsettling. Olivia had expected either false declarations of affection or cold indifference. This middle ground of respectful pragmatism was something she had not prepared herself to navigate. "I confess I do not know what to expect from marriage," she admitted. "My parents loved each other deeply, but theirs was a rare union. Most of the wives I knew seemed to exist in the shadows of their husbands' lives, valued more for their silence than their thoughts." "Elena was never silent," Jerry said with a slight smile that transformed his scarred features. "She had opinions on everything from the training of horses to the management of the harvest, and she was not shy about sharing them. Her counsel proved invaluable more often than not. I would welcome such partnership again, should you choose to offer it." The conversation marked a turning point in their relationship. Over the remaining weeks before their wedding, Olivia found herself seeking out Jerry's company rather than avoiding it. She joined him for his morning inspections of the keep, learning about the complexities of managing a large household and the surrounding lands. She discovered that he was an educated man who read widely and thought deeply about matters of justice and governance. Jerry, in turn, seemed to appreciate her quick mind and genuine interest in his work. He began consulting her on matters large and small, from the placement of new defenses to the resolution of disputes between tenant farmers. Olivia found herself rising to meet these challenges, drawing on knowledge she had gained, helping her father manage their own estate before his death. The wedding preparations proceeded around them, but the ceremony itself seemed almost secondary to the partnership that was developing between them. Ruth Patel watched their growing rapport with satisfaction, while the household staff began to treat Olivia with the respect due to their future lady, rather than the wariness reserved for unwelcome strangers. 3 days before the wedding, a messenger arrived from the south bearing troubling news. Lord Dennis Hill, the man who had arranged Olivia's marriage, was riding north with a large retinue. Ostensibly, he came to attend the wedding celebration, but Jerry's expression grew grim as he read the formal announcement of Hill's intended visit. "What troubles you?" Olivia asked, noting the tension in Jerry's shoulders as he dismissed the messenger. "Dennis Hill is not a man who travels far from his own lands without purpose," Jerry replied carefully. "His presence at our wedding is unexpected, and I fear, unwelcome. But he arranged our marriage. Surely he comes to see the fruits of his diplomacy." Jerry's laugh held no humor. "Hill arranged our marriage to serve his own interests, not ours. Your father's lands border his own domain, and through our union he hoped to gain influence over territories he could not claim directly. I accepted the arrangement because it offered you protection and brought strategic value to Ravens Hollow, but I have no illusions about Hill's motivations." A chill ran down Olivia's spine as she began to understand the larger game in which she had been an unwitting piece. "What do you think he wants now?" "That remains to be seen, but I suspect he has discovered some way to profit further from our situation. Hill is not a man to leave potential advantages unexploited." The next 2 days passed in a flurry of preparation as Ravens Hollow readied itself to receive Lord Hill and his retinue. Jerry doubled the guards and quietly moved additional weapons to strategic locations throughout the keep. To outside observers, these looked like normal wedding preparations, but Olivia recognized them for what they were: preparations for potential conflict. On the morning of Dennis Hill's arrival, Olivia stood beside Jerry in the Great Hall as their unwelcome guest made his entrance. Hill was a man of medium height, with thinning hair and calculating eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. He was accompanied by 20 armed men, far more than necessary for a simple wedding attendance. "Lord Jerry, Lady Olivia," Hill said with a smile that never reached his eyes, "how delighted I am to see this union come to fruition. You both look well, though I confess surprise at how comfortable you appear together. I had expected the adjustment to be more difficult." "We have found common ground," Jerry replied evenly. "Thank you for your concern." Hill's gaze lingered on Olivia with an intensity that made her skin crawl. "Indeed, Lady Olivia, you have blossomed since last we met. Marriage clearly agrees with you, even before the ceremony has taken place." The innuendo in his words was unmistakable, and Olivia felt Jerry tense beside her. She kept her expression neutral as she replied, "Lord Hill, I am grateful for the sanctuary Lord Jerry has provided during these difficult times. His kindness has been a blessing." "Sanctuary," Hill repeated, as if tasting the word. "Yes, I suppose that is one way to view it. Tell me, Jerry, how do you find managing Lady Olivia's inherited debts? I imagine they present quite a challenge." The question hung in the air like a blade poised to strike. Olivia's heart lurched as she realized Hill knew something about her father's financial affairs that she did not. Jerry's expression remained carefully neutral, but she could see the calculation behind his eyes. "Lady Olivia's inheritance is a matter between us," Jerry said carefully. "I am confident we can manage any obligations that come with our union." Hill's smile widened. "How noble of you. Of course, some obligations are more pressing than others. I recently acquired certain documents that suggest Lord Foster's debts were even more extensive than previously known. Debts that, by law, transfer to his daughter and her husband upon her marriage." Olivia felt the blood drain from her face. Her father had been secretive about their financial troubles in his final months, but she had assumed Jerry knew the full extent of what he was taking on. The predatory gleam in Hill's eyes suggested otherwise. "What documents?" Jerry asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Promissory notes, gambling debts, loans secured against future harvests that will never come," Hill replied, producing a leather portfolio from his robes. "The total sum is quite substantial. I estimate it would take several years of Ravens Hollow's full income to satisfy these obligations." Jerry's jaw tightened as he accepted the documents and began to scan their contents. Olivia watched his face for any sign of anger or betrayal, but saw only focused concentration as he evaluated this new threat. "Assuming these documents are genuine," Jerry said after a long moment, "what is your interest in them, Hill? Surely you did not purchase Lord Foster's debts out of charity." "Charity?" Hill laughed. "Hardly. I saw an opportunity to help old friends navigate a difficult situation. I am prepared to forgive these debts entirely, asking only a small favor in return." The trap was springing, and Olivia could see its jaws closing around them. "What favor?" she asked, though she dreaded the answer. Hill's eyes glittered with triumph. "Nothing unreasonable, merely that Lady Olivia honor a prior commitment her father made before his death, a betrothal contract signed with my own son, Larry Cooper, that predates any arrangement with Lord Jerry." The Great Hall seemed to spin around Olivia as the full scope of Hill's manipulation became clear. He had allowed her father to accumulate crushing debts, then use those debts to force a marriage arrangement with Jerry, only to reveal at the last moment that she was already promised to his son. The web of legal obligations would be nearly impossible to untangle, especially with Hill controlling the documentation. "That contract was superseded by our arrangement," Jerry said, but his voice lacked conviction. Medieval law regarding betrothal contracts was complex, and Hill clearly believed he held the stronger position. "Was it? I think any court would find that a father cannot promise his daughter to one man while she remains legally bound to another. The church certainly would not recognize such a union as valid." Jerry set the documents aside and stepped closer to Hill, his presence suddenly menacing despite his calm demeanor. "And if we refuse your generous offer to forgive these convenient debts?" Hill spread his hands in a gesture of false regret. "Then I would be forced to pursue collection through the courts." Raven's Hollow would be seized to satisfy the obligations, and Lady Olivia would find herself homeless once again. Surely it is better for all concerned if she simply honors her father's original commitment. Olivia felt trapped between two impossible choices: marriage to Larry Cooper, Hill's weak-willed son who was known for his cruelty to servants and his fondness for drink, or the destruction of everything Jerry had built at Ravens Hollow. Either path led to misery, but one would destroy an innocent man along with her own hopes. "I need time to consider this," Jerry said finally. "Of course," Hill replied magnanimously. "Take the evening to discuss it between yourselves. We can resolve this matter tomorrow, before the wedding guests arrive. I am sure you will see the wisdom of accepting my proposal." As Hill withdrew with his retinue, Jerry and Olivia found themselves alone in the great hall. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of impossible decisions. "I am sorry," Olivia whispered, her voice barely audible. "I had no knowledge of these debts, I swear to you. My father never spoke of any prior betrothal." Jerry turned to look at her, and she was surprised to see not anger in his expression, but something that looked almost like relief. "You have nothing to apologize for, Olivia. This is Hill's doing, not yours. But the choice he offers is no choice at all. Either you lose everything you have built, or I must marry a man I despise. There is no path forward that does not end in misery for one of us." Jerry moved closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes. "There is a third option, though it carries its own risks." "What option?" "We proceed with our wedding as planned and deal with Hill's threats afterward. Let him pursue his legal challenges if he dares. Ravens Hollow has weathered storms before." Olivia shook her head. "You do not understand what you would be risking. These debts could destroy you, and Hill has the political connections to make his legal threats very real. I cannot ask you to gamble everything on my behalf." "You are not asking," Jerry replied firmly. "I am choosing. Hill's game depends on our fear and our willingness to accept his version of the law as final. But laws can be challenged, debts can be disputed, and powerful men can overreach themselves." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Olivia's chest, a flutter of hope she had not dared to feel. "You would truly risk so much for a marriage that began as political necessity?" Jerry's hand rose to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses earned through years of sword work. "What began as necessity has become something more, at least for me. I will not surrender what we have built together to satisfy Hill's greed." Before she could respond, the great hall doors burst open and armed men poured through them. Hill's retinue had shed all pretense of civility, their weapons drawn as they surrounded Jerry and Olivia. At their head strode Larry Cooper, Hill's son, his face flushed with drink and anticipated triumph. "Enough talk," Larry declared, his words slurred, but his intent clear. "The lady comes with us now, and this farce of a wedding ends before it begins." Jerry's sword cleared its sheath in one fluid motion, the steel singing as it caught the firelight. "The lady goes nowhere against her will." The confrontation erupted into chaos as Jerry's household guards rushed to defend their lord and his betrothed. Steel rang against steel in the great hall as the two forces clashed, but Hill's men had the advantage of preparation and numbers. Jerry fought with deadly precision, his blade carving through opponents as he tried to keep Olivia behind him, but they were slowly being overwhelmed. The passage behind the tapestry, Ruth Patel's voice cut through the din as the older woman appeared at Olivia's side, a wicked-looking dagger in her weathered hand. "It leads to the stables. You must flee while Lord Jerry holds them here." "I will not abandon him," Olivia protested, even as Jerry was forced back another step by the press of attackers. "You will not help him by being captured," Ruth replied firmly. "Go and trust that he will follow when he can." Jerry's voice rose above the sound of combat. "Olivia, go! This is not over." With a sob of frustration and fear, Olivia allowed Ruth to guide her toward the hidden passage. As they reached the concealed entrance, she looked back to see Jerry surrounded but still fighting, his scarred face grim with determination. Then Ruth pulled her into the darkness of the secret tunnel, and the sounds of battle faded behind them. The passage was narrow and steep, carved from the living rock of the mountain on which Ravens Hollow stood. Ruth moved with surprising agility for her age, a small torch in one hand and her dagger in the other. They emerged into the stables to find Jerry's men-at-arms already saddling horses under the direction of Jose King, the castle's master of horse. "Lady Olivia," Jose said with evident relief, "Lord Jerry sent word that you might need swift passage. The fastest horses are ready, and I have provisions for several days' travel." "Where can we go?" Olivia asked, her mind reeling from the speed of events. Hill's influence extends throughout the Southern Territories. "North," Ruth replied without hesitation, "to the court of King Tyler Kelly. He has no love for Dennis Hill's political maneuvering, and he values Jerry's service to the realm. If anyone can provide sanctuary while this matter is resolved, it is the king himself." The sound of fighting was growing closer, and Jose urged them toward the prepared horses. "You must ride hard and trust that Lord Jerry will find a way to follow. He has escaped from worse situations than this." As if summoned by his words, Jerry appeared in the stable doorway, his sword still in hand and blood on his tunic. Several of his loyal guards flanked him, but it was clear they had fought their way free rather than won a decisive victory. "Hill's men control the keep," Jerry reported grimly as he swung into the saddle of his destrier, "but they will not hold it long. My people know these mountains better than any Southern Lord soldiers." "What of Hill himself?" Olivia asked as they rode out into the night. "Safely behind his men's shields, as always," Jerry replied with disgust. "But his son was not so fortunate. Larry Cooper will not be troubling anyone for some time." They rode hard through the darkness, following the mountain paths that Jerry and his men knew by heart. Behind them, the lights of Raven's Hollow grew distant, but the knowledge that their home was in enemy hands weighed heavily on all of them. Olivia found herself thinking of the servants and villagers who depended on Jerry's protection, now at the mercy of Hill's ambitions. As dawn broke over the mountains, they paused to rest their horses and take stock of their situation. Jerry's small band consisted of only 6 men besides himself and the 2 women, hardly enough to retake a fortified position. But Jerry seemed less concerned with immediate military action than with the longer game Hill was playing. "He cannot hold Raven's Hollow indefinitely," Jerry mused as they shared bread and cheese from their provisions. "The king's law requires proper justification for seizing another lord's lands, and Hill's debts and contracts will not withstand close scrutiny. But he needs time to consolidate his position and present his case in the most favorable light." "How much time?" Olivia asked. "Weeks, perhaps months, long enough to make his occupation appear legitimate and to pressure the king's court to accept his version of events." Ruth Patel, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. "There is another consideration. The wedding guests who were invited to celebrate your marriage will arrive at Raven's Hollow to find it occupied by Hill's forces. Word of this treachery will spread quickly among the noble houses." Jerry's eyes brightened as he grasped the implications. "You are right. Hill has overplayed his hand by acting so openly. Many lords who might have remained neutral in a legal dispute will not tolerate such blatant seizure of a peer's lands." The journey to the king's court took 5 days of hard riding through increasingly civilized territory. As they traveled, Jerry sent messages ahead through loyal contacts, ensuring that their version of events would reach King Tyler Kelly before any reports Hill might send. The political maneuvering was as important as the physical escape from Raven's Hollow. King Tyler Kelly received them in his private chambers rather than the formal throne room, a sign that he took their situation seriously. The king was a man in his middle years, with graying hair and intelligent eyes that missed little. He listened without interruption as Jerry recounted Hill's treachery and the circumstances of their flight. "These documents Hill claims to possess," the king said when Jerry finished his account. "Have you had opportunity to examine them closely?" "Only briefly, Your Majesty, but they appear genuine on first inspection. However, the timing of their revelation and Hill's possession of them raises questions about how they came to be in his hands." The king nodded thoughtfully. "Dennis Hill has long sought to expand his influence through such machinations. This would not be the first time he has manipulated debt and obligation to serve his purposes." He turned his attention to Olivia. "Lady Foster, what is your will in this matter? Do you believe yourself bound by this alleged prior betrothal?" Olivia straightened in her chair, drawing on reserves of courage she had not known she possessed. "Your Majesty, I have no memory of any betrothal to Larry Cooper, Nor did my father ever speak of such an arrangement. If such a contract exists, it was made without my knowledge or consent. I believe Lord Hill has fabricated or manipulated these documents to serve his own ends. And your preference regarding marriage? The question hung in the air, weighted with political implications. Olivia's answer would influence not only her own fate, but the balance of power among several noble houses. She looked at Jerry, seeing in his face the man who had protected her, valued her counsel, and risked everything rather than surrender her to Hill's schemes. I wish to honor the arrangement my father made with Lord Jerry, Your Majesty. We have found partnership and mutual respect. And I believe our union would serve the realm's interests better than any forced marriage to Lord Hill's son. King Tyler Kelly leaned back in his chair, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. The silence stretched until Olivia began to fear she had said too much or too little. Finally, the king spoke. The law regarding betrothal contracts is indeed complex, but it is not absolute. A contract made without the bride's knowledge or consent, particularly one that surfaces only after other arrangements have been made, carries little weight in my court. However, the matter of Lord Foster's debts is more serious. Jerry leaned forward. Your Majesty, I am prepared to assume responsibility for any legitimate debts, but I question both the authenticity and the circumstances under which Lord Hill acquired these obligations. As do I, the king replied, which is why I am ordering a full investigation into Hill's claims. Until that investigation is complete, you and Lady Olivia will remain under royal protection. Your marriage may proceed as planned, but it will take place here at court under my auspices. Relief flooded through Olivia, but she could see that Jerry remained tense. What of Ravenshollow, Your Majesty? Hill's forces still occupy my lands. That situation will be resolved, the king said firmly. I am dispatching a royal garrison to escort Hill and his men from your lands. Any resistance will be treated as rebellion against the crown. The wedding took place 3 days later in the royal chapel. A far grander affair than the simple ceremony they had planned at Ravenshollow. Olivia wore a gown of deep blue silk provided by the Queen's own seamstresses, while Jerry stood resplendent in his finest court attire. The ceremony was attended by dozens of noble witnesses, ensuring that no future challenge to their union could claim lack of proper solemnization. As they exchanged vows, Olivia marveled at how much had changed since her arrival at Ravenshollow. The man standing beside her was no longer the frightening stranger of village gossip, but a partner who had proven his worth through deed rather than word. When Jerry spoke his vows, promising to cherish and protect her, she heard not empty formality, but genuine commitment. The wedding feast that followed was a celebration not only of their union, but of Hill's defeat. Word had arrived that morning that the royal garrison had successfully retaken Ravenshollow without bloodshed. Hill's forces, faced with overwhelming numbers and the king's explicit orders, had withdrawn without a fight. Hill himself had been arrested pending investigation of his fraudulent claims. It seems your instinct about the documents was correct, Jerry murmured to Olivia as they watched the festivities from the high table. The king's investigators found evidence that several of the promissory notes were forgeries, created after your father's death. What will happen to Hill? That depends on what else the investigation reveals. At minimum, he will face charges of fraud and illegal seizure of noble lands. The penalties for such crimes are severe. As the evening wore on, Jerry and Olivia found themselves on a balcony overlooking the castle's gardens, seeking a moment of quiet away from the celebration. The autumn air was crisp and stars shone brightly in the clear sky above. Do you regret it? Jerry asked suddenly. The path that brought us together was not one either of us would have chosen. Olivia considered the question carefully. I regret the circumstances that made our marriage necessary, and I regret the pain Hill's schemes have caused, but I do not regret finding you or discovering that the monster of reputation was actually a man of honor and gentle heart. Jerry's hand found hers in the darkness. I feared you would see me as Hill did, as a means to an end rather than a person worthy of respect and affection. Never, Olivia replied firmly. You have shown me kindness when you could have shown indifference, protection when you could have shown neglect, and partnership when you could have demanded submission. Whatever brought us together, what we have built together is real. They returned to Ravens Hollow a week later, accompanied by a royal escort that ensured their safe passage. The keep showed signs of Hill's brief occupation, but the damage was minimal. More importantly, the people who depended on Jerry's protection welcomed their return with genuine joy. Ruth Patel met them in the Great Hall with tears in her eyes and a feast prepared to celebrate their homecoming. The household never doubted you would return, she told them. Lord Jerry has never failed those who trust in him. Over the following months, Jerry and Olivia settled into married life with an ease that surprised them both. Their partnership, forged in crisis, proved equally strong in peace. Olivia took on the management of the household with Ruth's guidance, while also serving as Jerry's advisor on matters of law and diplomacy. Her education and quick mind proved valuable assets in dealing with the complex political relationships that govern their world. The investigation into Hill's crimes revealed a pattern of fraud and manipulation stretching back years. Several other noble families came forward with evidence of similar schemes, and Hill faced charges that would likely result in the forfeiture of his own lands. His son Larry, still recovering from injuries sustained during the attack on Ravens Hollow, found himself heir to disgrace rather than wealth. Justice has been served, Jerry observed one evening as they sat before the fire in their private chambers, reading reports from the king's court. But I confess I take no pleasure in Hill's downfall. His greed has destroyed not only his own family, but caused suffering to many innocents. Perhaps his example will deter others from similar schemes, Olivia suggested. The king's justice has been swift and thorough. Other ambitious lords will think twice before attempting such manipulations. As winter gave way to spring, life at Ravens Hollow found its rhythm. The lands prospered under Jerry and Olivia's joint management, and their people thrived under their protection. The marriage that had begun as political necessity had become something neither had dared to hope for. A true partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and growing affection. One morning in late spring, as they walked together through Ruth's carefully tended gardens, Olivia reflected on how much her life had changed since that desperate flight from her family's ruined estate. The woman who had arrived at Ravens Hollow's gates as a frightened refugee had become the lady of a prosperous domain, respected by her people and cherished by her husband. I have been thinking about Elena, Olivia said as they paused beside the small garden where Jerry's first wife was buried. Fresh flowers adorned the grave, placed there by Jerry as part of his regular visits. Jerry's expression grew cautious. What about her? I want to thank her, Olivia replied simply. Her love made you the man you are, the man I was fortunate enough to marry. Without her influence, you might have become the cold, bitter lord that village gossip claimed you to be. Jerry's eyes grew bright with unshed tears. She would have liked you very much. Elena always said that the best marriages were partnerships of equals, where both husband and wife brought their strengths to serve their people in their land. Then we honor her memory by living according to her wisdom, Olivia said, taking Jerry's hand in hers. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who had found in each other not the passion of fairy tales, but something perhaps more valuable, a love built on respect, trust, and shared purpose. The scars of their difficult beginnings had healed, leaving behind strength rather than bitterness. As they prepared to return to the keep, a messenger arrived with news from the king's court. Jerry broke the royal seal and read quickly, his expression growing grave. What is it? Olivia asked, recognizing the signs of serious news. Border troubles in the east, Jerry replied. The king requests that I lead a force to investigate reports of raiders crossing from the neighboring kingdom. It seems our peaceful interlude may be ending. Olivia felt a familiar flutter of fear, but it was tempered now by confidence in Jerry's abilities and in their partnership. How long will you be gone? Several weeks, perhaps longer if the situation proves serious. I hate to leave you so soon after our return, but duty to the realm must come first. I understand, Olivia said and meant it. Ravens Hollow will be here when you return, and so will I. Ruth and I can manage the estate in your absence. Jerry's smile was filled with pride and affection. I have no doubt of that. You have proven yourself more than capable of handling whatever challenges arise. The preparations for Jerry's departure took 2 days, during which Olivia threw herself into learning every detail of the estate's operations. She met with the captains of the household guard, reviewed the accounts with the steward, and consulted with Ruth about the management of the servants in the upcoming harvest preparations. "You have grown into this role as if born to it," Ruth observed as they worked late into the evening before Jerry's departure. "When you first arrived, I saw a frightened girl trying to be brave. Now I see a true lady, confident in her authority and wise in its use." "I had good teachers," Olivia replied. "You and Jerry both showed me that leadership is service, Amaros, not dominance." The morning of Jerry's departure dawned clear and bright, with the promise of a beautiful summer day. Olivia stood in the courtyard as Jerry's small army assembled, 50 mounted men-at-arms equipped for extended campaigning. Jerry himself wore his finest armor, polished to a mirror brightness that reflected the morning sun. As he prepared to mount his destrier, Jerry took Olivia in his arms for a farewell embrace. "Keep Raven's Hollow safe for me," he murmured against her ear. "Keep yourself safe for Raven's Hollow," she replied. "We need you to come back to us." Jerry's kiss was gentle but filled with promise. "I will return as soon as duty allows. Trust in that." Olivia watched from the battlements as Jerry's force rode out through the main gate and down the mountain path toward the eastern borders. The sight of his banner disappearing around a distant bend filled her with loneliness, but also with determination. She had work to do in his absence, and she would not disappoint the trust he had placed in her. The weeks that followed tested Olivia's newfound confidence in ways she had not anticipated. A dispute arose between two villages over water rights, requiring careful negotiation to prevent violence. A merchant caravan was attacked by bandits on the main road, necessitating increased patrols and diplomatic contact with neighboring lords. Most challenging of all, news arrived that Larry Cooper had escaped from custody and was reportedly gathering supporters for some desperate scheme. He blames Lord Jerry for his father's downfall, Jose King reported during one of their regular security briefings. "There are rumors that he plans to attack Raven's Hollow while Lord Jerry is away." "What force could he possibly gather?" Olivia asked. "His family's lands are forfeit, and his reputation is destroyed." "Desperate men attract other desperate men," Ruth observed grimly. "Outlaws, mercenaries, younger sons with nothing to lose. Such men care little for reputation if the promised reward is great enough." Olivia felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a mantle. Jerry had left her in charge not just of managing the estate, but of protecting it from threats both internal and external. The thought was daunting, but she drew strength from the knowledge that she was not alone. Ruth's wisdom, Jose's military expertise, and the loyalty of Jerry's people were all at her disposal. "Double the watch on all approaches to the keep," she ordered. "Send word to our allies that we may need assistance, and prepare the castle for possible siege. I will not allow Larry Cooper to succeed where his father failed." The attack came 3 days later, just before dawn when the defenders would be at their most vulnerable. Olivia was awakened by the sound of horns blowing the alarm from the watchtowers. She dressed quickly and rushed to the battlements, where Jose was already directing the defense. "How many?" she asked, peering down at the shadowy figures moving in the pre-dawn darkness. "Perhaps 30 men," Jose replied. "Not enough for a proper siege, but more than enough to cause serious damage if they breach the walls." "They will not breach the walls," Olivia said with more confidence than she felt. "Jerry built this place to withstand far greater threats than Larry Cooper can muster." The attack began with a flight of flaming arrows aimed at the wooden structures within the courtyard. Most fell harmlessly on stone, but a few found their mark in the stables and outbuildings. As the defenders rushed to fight the fires, ladders appeared against the outer walls. Olivia found herself in the thick of the action, not as a helpless woman to be protected, but as the lady of the castle directing its defense. She coordinated the firefighting efforts while Jose managed the military response, and together they repelled the first assault with minimal casualties. "They are testing our defenses," Jose observed as the attackers fell back to regroup. "Cooper is not the fool his father was. He will look for weaknesses before committing to a full assault." "Then we must ensure he finds none," Olivia replied. She turned to address the defenders gathered in the courtyard, raising her voice to carry over the sounds of preparation. "Men of Raven's Hollow, we face an enemy who seeks to steal what we have built together. He comes not with right or justice, but with greed and vengeance. Show him that the people of this keep do not yield to such base motives. A cheer went up from the assembled defenders, and Olivia felt a surge of pride at their response. These were not her people by birth, but by choice, and they had accepted her as their lady not through inheritance, but through her actions. The second attack came at midday, a more coordinated assault that targeted the main gate while simultaneously attempting to scale the walls at three different points. This time, Larry Cooper himself led the charge, his face twisted with hatred as he screamed curses at the defenders. "Open the gates, you witch!" he shouted up at Olivia, who stood prominently on the battlements. "Face me in single combat if you have any honor." "I face you as the lady of this keep faces all enemies," Olivia called back. From a position of strength, surrounded by loyal defenders who will not yield to your threats. The battle raged for hours, with the attackers making several attempts to breach the defenses. Each time they were driven back by the superior position and determination of the defenders. As afternoon wore on, it became clear that Cooper's force lacked the numbers and equipment for a successful siege. "He will withdraw soon," Jose predicted, as they watched the attackers pull back once again. "His men are taking heavy casualties, and he has no prospect of success." But Larry Cooper proved more desperate than either of them had anticipated. As evening approached, he made one final suicidal assault on the main gate, leading a small group of his most fanatical followers in a charge that could only end in death or victory. The gate held, but Cooper managed to reach the courtyard with three of his men before being surrounded by defenders. In the melee that followed, he broke free and ran toward the keep's main entrance, apparently seeking to reach Olivia herself. Ruth Patel stepped into his path, her dagger gleaming in the torchlight. "You will not pass, boy," she said calmly. Cooper's sword swept down toward the older woman, but Jose King's blade intercepted it inches from her head. The master of horse and the would-be usurper fought briefly but fiercely, their weapons ringing in the stone courtyard until Jose's superior skill told. Cooper fell with a cry of rage and pain, his sword clattering across the stones. "It is finished," Jose announced, standing over Cooper's still form. "The threat is ended." Olivia descended from the battlements to survey the aftermath of the battle. The cost had been higher than she liked, with several defenders wounded and damaged to parts of the keep, but they had held. Raven's Hollow remained secure under her protection. "Send word to Lord Jerry," she instructed one of the messengers. "Tell him that his home is safe and his people remain loyal. Tell him that his wife has proven worthy of the trust he placed in her." Jerry returned 2 weeks later, his mission in the eastern borderlands successfully completed. He found Raven's Hollow scarred but unbroken, its people proud of their lady's leadership during the crisis. The story of Olivia's defense of the keep had already spread throughout the region, adding to her reputation as a woman of courage and wisdom. "I should never have doubted," Jerry said, as they stood together in the great hall where their marriage had begun under such different circumstances. "You have proven yourself not just as my wife, but as a true lady of Raven's Hollow." "We have proven ourselves," Olivia corrected gently. "Your people fought for me because I was fighting for what you built together. Their loyalty was earned by your years of fair treatment and protection." Jerry's arms encircled her, holding her close against his chest. "When I first saw you at these gates, I thought I was gaining a political alliance and perhaps a companion. I never dreamed I would find a true partner, someone who could stand as my equal in all things." "Nor did I," Olivia admitted. "I expected at best a kind master, at worst a cruel one. Instead, I found a man whose gentle heart was hidden behind necessary strength, someone who valued my mind as much as my birth." They had come full circle from that first meeting, but the people who stood in the great hall now were transformed by their shared experiences. The frightened refugee and the lonely widower had become partners in the truest sense, united not just by law and politics, but by mutual respect and deepening love. As autumn returned to the mountains around Raven's Hollow, Jerry and Olivia settled into a routine that balanced the demands of governing their lands with the simple pleasures of married life. They walked together in Ruth's gardens, where Elena's grave was now marked not with solitary sorrow, but with acceptance and peace. They worked side by side in the great hall, settling disputes and planning for the future. They shared quiet evenings by the fire, reading or simply talking about the events of their days. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Hill had not overreached himself?" Olivia asked one evening as they sat together watching the flames dance out in the hearth. Sometimes, Jerry admitted. But I have learned that dwelling on alternate paths leads only to regret or false satisfaction. We are where we are because of the choices we made in response to the circumstances we faced. That seems more important than what might have been. Wise words from a wise husband, Olivia said with a smile. Though I confess I am grateful that circumstances led me to your door rather than to some other fate. As am I, Jerry replied, pulling her closer. Though I suspect we would have found each other eventually, in this life or another. Some partnerships seem destined, regardless of the paths that create them. Winter arrived early that year, blanketing Ravens Hollow in snow that transformed the harsh mountain fortress into something approaching beauty. The white covering softened the castle's stern lines and created a sense of peaceful isolation from the outside world. Jerry and Olivia spent long evenings planning improvements for the spring, discussing everything from new defenses to expanded trade agreements with neighboring domains. I have been thinking about the future, Olivia said one night as they reviewed maps of their territories. Not just the immediate future of next year's crops and this winter's stores, but the longer future. What legacy do we want to leave? Jerry looked up from the documents he had been studying. What sort of legacy did you have in mind? Something more than just military strength and political influence, Olivia replied thoughtfully. Elena's garden, Ruth's kindness to the servants, your fair treatment of the villagers. These things matter as much as strong walls and sharp swords. I want Ravens Hollow to be remembered as a place where people were valued, where justice was tempered with mercy. A noble goal, Jerry agreed, and one that requires both of us to achieve. Such a legacy cannot be built by force or decree, but must grow from daily choices and consistent actions. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion in the courtyard below. Jerry moved to the window and peered down through the falling snow. A messenger, he announced, riding hard despite the weather. This must be urgent news indeed. The messenger brought word from King Tyler Kelly, summoning Jerry to court for an important conference regarding the kingdom's eastern defenses. The recent troubles on the border had convinced the king that a more permanent solution was needed, and he wanted Jerry's counsel on military matters. How long will you be gone this time? Olivia asked as Jerry prepared for another journey. The king's message suggests several weeks, possibly longer if the discussions prove complex. I am sorry to leave you again so soon after the last crisis. Do not apologize for serving the realm, Olivia replied firmly. Your duty to the king is part of what makes you the man I married. Ravens Hollow will be here when you return, as will I. This time, Jerry's departure felt different to both of them. There was no fear of external threats, no uncertainty about Olivia's ability to manage in his absence. Instead, there was simply the natural sadness of separation between two people who had come to depend on each other's company. I will write regularly, Jerry promised as he prepared to mount his horse, and I will return as quickly as duty allows. See that you do, Olivia replied with mock sternness. Ruth and I have plans for improving the castle's defenses, and we will need your approval before we begin construction. Jerry's laughter echoed off the courtyard walls as he rode out into the swirling snow. Olivia watched from the battlements until his small party disappeared into the white landscape, then turned her attention to the responsibilities that awaited her. The weeks of Jerry's absence passed peacefully, filled with the routine business of managing a large estate during winter. Olivia found herself settling into the role of sole authority with increasing confidence, making decisions that would have terrified her a year earlier. The respect she had earned from Jerry's people during the siege made her task easier, as did Ruth's continued guidance and support. You have grown into a true lady of the keep, Ruth observed one evening as they reviewed the household accounts together. When Lord Jerry returns, he will find his domain not merely maintained, but improved. I have had excellent teachers, Olivia replied, and the advantage of Jerry's wise policies to build upon. It is easier to govern well when the foundation is already sound. The first hint of spring was in the air when Jerry finally returned, his mission to the king's court successfully completed. He brought with him news of political changes that would affect their region and plans for new defensive arrangements along the eastern border. The king has appointed me to oversee the construction of a chain of watchtowers, Jerry explained, as they sat together in their private chambers. It will mean additional responsibilities, but also greater influence in regional affairs. And greater opportunities to serve the realm's interests, Olivia added. I am proud of the trust the king places in your judgment. Our judgment, Jerry corrected. The king specifically asked about your role in defending Ravens Hollow during Cooper's attack. Your reputation has reached the court, and it reflects well on both of us. As spring progressed into summer, Jerry and Olivia threw themselves into the work of implementing the king's new defensive plans, while also managing the daily business of their own lands. The partnership that had begun in crisis had matured into something both deeper and more practical, a true joining of minds and purposes. I have been thinking about children, Olivia said one evening as they walked through the gardens where new growth was pushing up through the soil. Jerry's step faltered slightly. Children? Our children, Olivia clarified with a gentle smile. I know it is early in our marriage and there are many practical considerations, but I find myself hoping for a family to continue what we have built together. Jerry stopped walking and turned to face her fully. I would welcome children, if God wills it, but I want you to know that you are enough, just as you are. Our partnership does not require heirs to validate its worth. I know, Olivia replied, touching his cheek with gentle fingers. But imagine teaching our children about honor and justice, about the responsibility that comes with privilege, about the importance of protecting those who depend on us. What better legacy could we leave than young people raised with such values? When you put it that way, I find myself hoping for the same future, Jerry admitted, though I confess the thought of tiny versions of us running through these halls is both appealing and terrifying. Their laughter mingled with the sound of wind through the garden trees, a moment of pure happiness in lives that had known their share of struggle and uncertainty. As they continued their walk, both were already imagining the children who might someday play in these same gardens, inheriting not just lands and titles, but the values their parents had fought to preserve. The summer brought news from the outside world that reminded them how fortunate they had been in their trials. Dennis Hill had died in prison, his health broken by disgrace and confinement. His remaining family had been stripped of their title and lands, scattered to live as commoners in distant parts of the kingdom. The web of corruption he had woven was finally untangled, but the damage to innocent lives would take years to repair. I feel pity for them, Olivia admitted when the news arrived. Hill's wife and daughters bear no responsibility for his crimes, yet they suffer the consequences. The sins of the father, Jerry agreed grimly. It is one of the harshest aspects of our system of justice. But the alternative would be to allow such crimes to go unpunished, which would encourage others to similar schemes. Perhaps we could help them quietly, Olivia suggested. Not openly, which might be seen as supporting Hill's actions, but through intermediaries. A chance to rebuild their lives away from the shadow of his disgrace. Jerry's expression softened with pride and affection. Your compassion continues to amaze me. Yes, we could arrange such help, though it must be done carefully to avoid political complications. The arrangement of aid for Hill's innocent family members became one of many quiet acts of charity that marked Jerry and Olivia's governance of their domain. They established a fund for widows and orphans, improved the roads that connected their villages to larger markets, and began construction of a school where children could learn to read and write. These projects were funded not through increased taxes, but through careful management of resources and the profits from expanded trade. We are building something that will outlast us, Olivia observed one day as they watched stonemasons working on the foundation of the new school. Not just walls and buildings, but a community that values learning and justice. Elena would have loved this, Jerry said quietly. She always believed that true nobility came from service to others rather than dominance over them. Olivia squeezed his hand gently. Then we honor her memory through our actions, just as we honor the memory of my parents by using their teachings to guide our choices. As autumn arrived once again, marking the first anniversary of their wedding, Jerry and Olivia found themselves reflecting on the journey that had brought them together and the future that stretched ahead. The political crisis that had forced their union seemed like ancient history, replaced by a partnership built on mutual respect and deepening love. If someone had told me a year ago that I would find happiness in an arranged marriage, I would have thought them mad, Olivia confessed, as they sat together before the fire in their private chambers. If someone had told me that my second wife would prove as remarkable as my first, in entirely different ways, I would have been equally skeptical, Jerry replied. Yet here we are, proof that sometimes the most unexpected paths lead to the most valuable destinations. Their conversation was interrupted by Ruth Patel's gentle knock on the door. The older woman entered with a smile that seemed to light up the room. My lord, my lady, I bring news that I hope will add to your happiness on this anniversary of your wedding. What news? Olivia asked, though something in Ruth's expression already suggested the answer. The signs are unmistakable, my lady. You carry Lord Jerry's child. By next summer, Ravens Hollow will welcome its heir. The silence that followed was filled with wonder rather than surprise. Both Jerry and Olivia had hoped for this news, but the reality of it still took time to absorb. They were going to be parents, responsible not just for their lands and people, but for a new life that would carry their values into the future. Are you certain? Jerry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. As certain as such things can be, Ruth replied with the confidence of someone who had assisted at dozens of births. The child should arrive with the spring flowers, a fitting time for new beginnings. After Ruth left them alone, Jerry and Olivia sat in contemplative silence, each absorbed in thoughts of the future that was taking shape around them. The child growing within Olivia would inherit not just the lands and titles of Ravens Hollow, but the legacy of justice and compassion they had worked to establish. I am frightened, Olivia admitted finally. Not of childbirth, though that has its own terrors, but of the responsibility. How do we raise a child to be worthy of what we have built? The same way we learn to be worthy of it ourselves, Jerry replied thoughtfully. Through daily choices to do what is right rather than what is easy, through service to others rather than service to ourselves, through the understanding that privilege carries obligation. And through love, Olivia added, our child will grow up knowing that they are valued not for what they can provide, but for who they are. Winter settled over Ravens Hollow with unusual gentleness that year, as if the mountain itself were protecting the growing life within the castle walls. Olivia's pregnancy progressed smoothly, and she continued to take an active role in governing their domain, though Jerry became increasingly protective as her condition advanced. You need not treat me as if I were made of glass, she protested when he suggested she avoid a particularly contentious dispute between two villages. Women have been bearing children while managing their responsibilities since the beginning of time. Not my women carrying my children, Jerry replied with a mixture of humor and genuine concern. Humor me in this small vanity. I could not bear to lose you to anything I might have prevented. The tenderness in his voice melted her resistance. Very well, but only because I love you, not because I agree with your excessive caution. Spring arrived early, bringing with it the birth of their daughter on a morning when the garden was filled with blooming flowers and singing birds. The child entered the world with a lusty cry that announced her displeasure at being disturbed, then settled into peaceful sleep in her mother's arms. She is perfect, Jerry breathed, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. Look at those eyes. She already seems to be studying the world around her. She will need that curiosity, Olivia replied, exhausted but radiant with joy. There is much for her to learn about being the heir to Ravens Hollow. They named her Elena Ruth, honoring both Jerry's first wife and the woman who had become like a mother to Olivia. The choice felt right, a way of connecting their daughter to the women who had shaped their understanding of strength and compassion. The christening took place in the castle's chapel, with King Tyler Kelly himself serving as godfather in recognition of Jerry's service to the realm. The ceremony was attended by nobles from throughout the region, many of whom had watched Jerry and Olivia's marriage with skepticism, but now saw clear evidence of its success. She will be a formidable woman when she grows up, the king observed as he held baby Elena during the ceremony. I can see her parents' determination in her expression already. God willing, she will be formidable in the service of justice rather than in pursuit of power, Jerry replied. That is the legacy we hope to leave her. As summer progressed, life at Ravens Hollow settled into new rhythms, accommodating the presence of their heir. Olivia balanced her duties as lady of the castle with the demands of motherhood, while Jerry found himself spending hours simply watching his daughter sleep or play with the simple toys Ruth crafted for her. "You are completely besotted," Olivia teased one evening as she found Jerry sitting beside Elena's cradle, reading aloud from a book of poetry, despite the fact that the baby was fast asleep. "She needs to hear beautiful language from the beginning," Jerry replied without embarrassment. "How else will she develop an appreciation for literature and learning? At 3 months old, I suspect she is more interested in her next meal than in poetry," Olivia observed with gentle humor. "But I love that you want to share everything with her, even now." The peaceful months that followed Elena's birth were among the happiest of Jerry and Olivia's marriage. They had found their rhythm as partners, parents, and rulers of their domain. The challenges that had once seemed overwhelming now felt manageable, part of the natural order of their lives. But their tranquility was not destined to last undisturbed. As autumn approached, bringing with it Elena's first birthday, troubling news arrived from the kingdom's southern borders. A new threat was emerging, one that would test everything Jerry and Olivia had built together. The messenger who brought word of the southern troubles was travel-stained and exhausted, having ridden hard for days to reach Ravenshollow. He carried dispatches sealed with the king's personal seal, indicating news of the highest importance. Jerry broke the seal and read quickly, his expression growing grave with each line. "Invasion," he said finally, looking up at Olivia with troubled eyes. "A coalition of southern lords has allied with foreign mercenaries and crossed our borders in force. The king calls for all loyal lords to muster their forces and march to defend the realm." Olivia felt a familiar chill of fear, but it was tempered now by years of experience and confidence in their partnership. "How large a force does the king require from Ravenshollow?" "Every man we can spare," Jerry replied grimly. "This is not a border skirmish, but a full invasion. The survival of the kingdom may depend on how quickly we can respond." They spent the rest of the day in frantic preparation, calling in their vassals and organizing the mustering of their forces. Jerry would lead nearly 200 men south, leaving Ravenshollow defended by a skeleton garrison and the natural strength of its mountain position. "I do not like leaving you and Elena with so few defenders," Jerry admitted, as they worked late into the night on the preparations. "We survived Larry Cooper's attack with fewer men than will remain," Olivia reminded him. "And this time we have advance warning and better preparations. Go where duty calls you, and trust that we will keep your home safe." The morning of departure dawned clear and cold, with the first hint of winter in the mountain air. Jerry's army assembled in the courtyard, their weapons gleaming in the early sunlight and their banners snapping in the crisp breeze. It was an impressive sight, but Olivia could not help thinking of how empty the castle would feel in their absence. As Jerry prepared to mount his destrier, he took Olivia and baby Elena in his arms for what might be their final embrace. The weight of that possibility hung unspoken between them, too terrible to acknowledge directly, but impossible to ignore. "Come back to us," Olivia whispered against his ear. "Whatever happens in the South, remember that you have people here who need you, who love you." "I will return," Jerry promised, his voice thick with emotion. "This I swear to you on everything I hold sacred. No enemy will keep me from my family." Olivia stood on the battlements with Elena in her arms, watching Jerry's army march down the mountain path and disappear into the distance. The sight filled her with pride at their strength and purpose, but also with the lonely knowledge that the coming weeks would test her in ways she had never imagined. The news from the South came in fragments over the following days, carried by messengers and refugees fleeing the advancing invasion. The enemy force was larger than initially reported, and their advance had been swift and brutal. Several border fortresses had fallen, and the king's forces were struggling to organize an effective defense. "Lord Jerry's army joined the king's forces 3 days ago," one messenger reported. "They were preparing for a major battle when I left, but the outcome remained uncertain." Olivia absorbed each piece of news with outward calm while privately wrestling with fear for Jerry's safety. She threw herself into the work of managing Ravenshollow in his absence, both as a distraction from her worries and as a way of honoring her promise to keep his home secure. The attack, when it came, was not from the south as she had expected, but from the north, where a separate enemy force had circled around to strike at the kingdom's rear. Olivia first learned of the threat when the warning horns sounded from the watchtowers, their urgent calls echoing off the mountain peaks. "How many?" she asked Jose King as they rushed to the battlements to assess the situation. Perhaps 100 men, Jose replied, studying the approaching force through a spyglass. Professional soldiers, not bandits or desperate refugees. Someone planned this attack carefully. Olivia felt the familiar surge of determination that had sustained her through previous crises. Then we will give them the same reception we gave Larry Cooper. Signal the villages to take shelter and prepare for siege. The battle that followed tested every lesson Olivia had learned about leadership and defense. The enemy force was larger and better equipped than Cooper's desperate band, but they faced defenders who had learned from experience and were fighting to protect their homes and families. For 3 days, the siege raged around Ravens Hollow's walls. The attackers made repeated attempts to breach the defenses, while Olivia coordinated the response from the battlements with baby Elena secured in the safest part of the keep. Ruth Patel and the household staff worked tirelessly to tend the wounded and maintain supplies, while Jose King led the military defense with skill and courage. On the 4th day, as Olivia was beginning to worry about their ability to sustain the defense much longer, the sound of horns echoed from the southern approach to the castle. But these were not enemy horns. They were the familiar calls of Ravens Hollow's own forces returning home. Jerry had received word of the attack on his castle and had ridden north with a picked force of cavalry, leaving the main army to continue the fight in the south under the king's direct command. His arrival turned the tide of the siege in moments, as the attackers found themselves caught between the castle's defenders and Jerry's cavalry. The battle was brief but decisive. Faced with overwhelming odds and the loss of their advantage of surprise, the surviving attackers surrendered or fled into the mountains. Jerry's reunion with Olivia and Elena in the courtyard of their castle was a moment of pure joy, all the more precious for having been nearly lost. "You kept your promise," Olivia said as she held both her husband and daughter close. "You came back to us." "As I always will," Jerry replied, his voice rough with emotion and exhaustion. "Nothing in this world or the next could keep me from my family." The immediate crisis was over, but the larger war continued for several more months. Jerry returned to the south with his forces, leaving Ravens Hollow once again in Olivia's capable hands. This time, however, the separation was easier to bear, tempered by the knowledge that they had survived their greatest test and emerged stronger than ever. When peace finally came, it brought with it recognition of Jerry and Olivia's contributions to the kingdom's defense. The king elevated Jerry's title and granted additional lands in recognition of his military service, while Olivia received formal acknowledgement as one of the realm's most capable administrators. "We have built something lasting," Jerry observed one evening as they sat together in their private chambers, watching Elena play with wooden toys by the firelight. "Not just walls and defenses, but a legacy of service and justice that will outlive us both." "And love," Olivia added, taking his hand in hers. "We have built a marriage based on mutual respect and deepening affection, a partnership that has weathered every storm and grown stronger with each trial." As they looked toward the future, Jerry and Olivia could see the fruits of their labors all around them. Ravens Hollow prospered under their joint rule, its people secure and content. Their daughter grew healthy and bright, already showing signs of the intelligence and determination she had inherited from both parents. The school they had built was producing a new generation of educated young people who would serve the realm with wisdom and integrity. The woman who had once been nobody's desired bride had become one of the most respected ladies in the kingdom, her reputation built not on birth or beauty, but on competence and compassion. The man who had been feared as the Iron Wolf was now known throughout the realm as a just and honorable lord whose word was his bond. Their love story was not one of passion at first sight or romantic gestures, but something perhaps more valuable, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared values, and the daily choice to support and cherish each other through whatever challenges life might bring. It was a love that had grown stronger with time and trial, proving that the most lasting bonds are often forged in the crucible of shared adversity and common purpose. As winter settled once again over the mountains of Ravens Hollow, Jerry and Olivia looked forward to the years ahead with confidence and hope. They had found in each other not just spouses, but true partners, and in their partnership had discovered the secret of building something greater than either could have achieved alone. Their gentle hearts had recognized each other across the barriers of fear and suspicion, creating a love story that would inspire generations to come.